Alrighty. Who ready? I ready.
Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and you too can choose how to worship me. And we're going to be reading more of The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. My only gripe with this cover art is that it makes Frank Herbert's name bolder and bigger than Bill Ransom's, and I don't believe that that is fair to Bill Ransom. Um, it'll become quite abundant by the time we hit the end of the series that he was kind of keeping, in many ways, is keeping Frank Herbert on track, I guess you might say. Um, even though the third volume is maybe the most hectic of the three. It like everything happens in that book over the space of Jesus. I don't think it's even a week. I think it's a couple days. It's wild how much happens in a very short period of time. Um, Bill Ransom deserves a lot of credit for this trilogy. So Frank Herbert getting a more visible presentation on the cover is a little upsetting, I guess. Anyway, so previously on what didn't happen, we've been introduced to more characters, including Iluyank, Jesus Lewis's enforcer slash muscle guy. We've been introduced to what's her name? She's important. She's going to be important. Legata Hamill. Her of the raven hair. Um, I don't think we have the squicky bit this week. We do, however, have uh, an example of the Jesus incident. Now, you can, strictly speaking, because of what's going to happen later and a character we've been introduced to already, um, you could say it's the Jesus incident. It can be either one. I'm going with the Jesus incident because I'm going with something that we're going to touch on today. I don't think we're only going to get half of it though. We'll get the second half later. Um, so Legata Hamill is she's a politicker. She does politicking. I forget. I think she's nominally Oakes's cat's paw. She gets things done for Oakes, if memory serves. Um, she is quite clever, but she's been sent on a fact-finding mission to see what's going on down in Lewis's labs. And she's been told basically a lot of fluff about what they're doing down there. And there's a couple rooms that are sealed off that you can't get into. And she's like, "Well, what's going on there?" He's like, and the person, the guy who's running the show while Lewis is out at the Redoubt, is like, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's just the Garden with a capital T and a capital G, and that stands for trouble." Um, Also known as the Scream Room, because nothing bad has ever happened in a place called the Scream Room. It is aptly named, and trust and believe, whatever you're thinking of, it's a bit worse. Well, it's probably worse. If you have a particularly foul imagination, it might be worse. Or if you've read this before, then you know what's going on. But it is, suffice it to say, going to be a doozy, but we're not there yet. The flower room, not the garden. Sorry, the flower room. Oh, that's right. We also have to worry eventually about Rachel Demarest, uh, who I think hangs out with. Oh, what's his name? He's the drunk guy on the ship. It's not Murdoch. Murdoch is the guy. There's a large cast of characters. Have I mentioned this? I can barely keep track, and I've read this before. Um, not Winslow Ferry. He's, I believe, Rachel Demarest is connected to him. I should see if there's like a chart that shows the characters and who they're nominally acting on behalf of. Um, it'd be a pretty big chart. There's a lot going on. Anyway, hopefully you've tuned in before now, because otherwise it's going to be very confusing. And if you have tuned in before now, it's still going to probably be a bit confusing. A lot happens, and there's a lot of subtext, which gets expanded upon later generally. This is probably going to be a little bit shorter than previous, but that's because it breaks off at a convenient place. It's a very convenient break-off point. Other than that, Raja Flattery, now known as Raja Thomas, has accepted Ship's mission to get the colonists on Pandora to decide how to warship Ship. He will be going groundside along with Kerro Panille, the local poet, who also talks to Ship and has an open mind. Nominally, Raj Thomas slash Flattery is going to be there to study and communicate with the Lectrokelp. Now, there's a character he's going to be interacting with, and this isn't really a spoiler. There's been a mild, light allusion to this, but it is going to become increasingly obvious. Wela Taulini, I think her name is. I believe it's Wela Taulini. She was part of one of the original programs to study the Lectrokelp, and then something bad happened. Some crisis or disaster occurred. And I think we do not know what that is yet. We will get there. This also kind of happens in a fairly short time frame, though there's a couple time skips. The next book along, The Lazarus Effect, is a moderately short time frame, but it's like over the course of, I don't know, because there's a couple time skips that occur there. They're not large. They're like a matter of days, I think, at most. It happens in a fairly short time frame. And it's a lot. Like, this book has a lot of characters. Fortunately for the Lazarus Effect, which has maybe more characters, they're all very identifiable. You just have to remember them all. They've all got their own quirks, whereas this one, while they do have their own quirks, some of them don't quite get enough time to shine. Legata Hamill, regrettably, is one of them. She becomes rather important later, though. Um, Mostly, she's going to be a perspective character so that we know what's going on down here. What have High Muckety Mucks, specifically Lewis, what have they been up to? Oh, right. Jesus Lewis has, there was a clone uprising, a slave uprising, because they're hungry at the redoubt, and the workers said, "We will not work anymore, and we're going to rebel." And so Jesus Lewis locks himself and a couple other people away, and then the local fauna get in, specifically nerve runners, which are highly unpleasant little wormy things that lay eggs in your brain, and they eat nerve tissue. So they like burrow under your skin and eat along all your nerves, causing you excruciating pain. for the duration. Very unpleasant. And then they lay eggs in your skull, which is great. Real fun. Anyway, it turns out that they can be killed with chlorine. It just so happens. He has just learned this. So humanity has a defense against nerve runners. I wonder what else chlorine works on in this environment. Let's find out. The mind falls, the will drives on. Kerro Panille, The Collected Poems. Panille emerged from Ferry's office dazed and fearfully excited. Groundside! He knew what Hali thought of old Ferry, a bumbling fool, but there had been something else in the old man. Ferry had seemed sly and vindictive, consumed by unresolved hostilities. Even so, there was no evading his message. I'm going groundside. He had no time for dawdling. His orders required him to be at Ship Bay 50 in little more than an hour. Everything was controlled now by the time demands of Colony. It might be the last quarter of dayside here, but down at Colony it would soon be dawn, and the shuttles from Ship tried to make their groundside landings in the early hours there. Less highlighter activity then. Highlighters, dawn, groundside. The very words conveyed a sense of the exotic to him. No more of ships, passages, and halls. The full import of this change began to fill him. He could see and touch electrokelp. He could test for himself how this alien intelligence performed. Abruptly, Panille wanted to share his excitement with someone. He looked around at the sterile reaches of medical's corridors, a few medtechs hurrying about their business. None of the faces were friendly acquaintances. Hali's face was nowhere among these impersonal passerby. Everything he saw was just the bustle and movement of medical's ordinary comings and goings. Panille headed toward the main corridors. Medical's bright lights bothered him. It was a painful contrast with Ferry's office, the clutter, the dank smells. Ferry kept his office too dim. Probably hiding the clutter even from himself. It occurred to Panille then that Ferry's mind probably was like that office, dim and confused. A poor confused old man. At the first main corridor, Panille turned left towards his quarters. No time to search out Hali and share this momentous change. There would be time for sharing later, at the next shipside period of rest and recuperation. He would have much more to share then, too. At his cubby, Panille shoved things into a shipcloth bag. He was not sure what to take. No telling when he might return. Recorder and spare charges, certainly. A few keepsakes, clothes, notepads, and a spare stylus. And the silver net, of course. He stopped and held the net up to examine it. A gift from Ship, flexible silver and big enough to cover his head. Panille smiled as he rolled the net and confined it in its own ties. Ship seldom refused to answer one of his questions. Refusal signaled a defect in the question. But the day of this net had been memorable for refusals and shifting responses from Ship. Insatiable curiosity. That was the hallmark of the poet, and Ship certainly knew this. He had been at the instruction terminal, his request. Tell me about Pandora. Silence. Ship wanted a specific question. What is the most dangerous creature on Pandora? Ship showed him a composite picture of a human. Panille was irritated. Why won't you satisfy my curiosity? You were chosen for this special training because of your curiosity. Not because I'm a poet? When did you become a poet? Panille remembered staring at his own reflection in the glistening surface of the display screen where ship revealed its symbolic patterns. Words are your tools, but they are not enough, Ship said. That is why there are poets. Panille had continued to stare at his reflection in the screen, caught by the thought that it was a reflection, but it also was displayed where Ship's symbols danced. Am I a symbol? His appearance, he knew, was striking, the only shipman who wore a beard and long hair. As usual, the hair was plaited back and bound by a golden ring at the nape of his neck. He was the picture of a poet from the history holos. Ship, do you write my poetry? You ask the question of the Zen placebo. How do I know I am me? A nonsense question, as you, a poet, should know. I have to be sure my poetry is my own. You truly believe I might try to direct your poetry? I have to be certain. Very well. Here is a shield which will isolate you from me. When you wear it, your thoughts are your own. How can I be sure of that? Try it. The silvery net had come out of the pneumatic slot beside the screen. Fingers trembling, Panille opened the round carrier, examined the contents, and put the net over his head, tucking his long black hair up into it. Immediately he sensed a special silence in his head. It was frightening at first, and then exciting. I'm alone, really alone. The words which had flowed from him then had achieved extra energy, a compulsive rhythm whose power touched his fellow shipmen in strange ways. One of the physicists refused to read or listen to his poetry.
You twist my mind,
The old man shouted. Panille chuckled at the memory and tucked the silver snood into his shipcloth bag. Zen placebo? Panille shook his head. No time for such thoughts. When the bag was full, he decided that that solved his packing problem. He took up his bag and forced himself not to look back when he left. His cubby was the past, a place of furious writing periods and restless inner probings. He had spent many a sleepless night there, and, for one period, had taken to wandering the corridors looking for a cool breeze from a ventilator. Ship had felt overly warm and uncommunicative then. But it was really me. I was the uncommunicative one. At Ship Bay 50, he was told to wait in an alcove with no chair or bench. It was a tiny metal-walled space, too small for him even to stretch out on the floor. There were two hatches, the one through which he had entered and another directly opposite. Sensor lenses glittered at him from above the hatches, and he knew he was being watched. Why, could I have angered the boss? Waiting made him nervous. Why did they tell me to get right out here if they were Why did they tell me to get right out here if they were gonna make me wait? It was like that faraway time when his mother had taken him to the shipmen. He had been 5 years old, a child of Earth. She had taken him by the hand up the ramp to ship reception. He had not even known what ship meant then, but he had been sensitized to what was about to happen to him because his mother had explained it with great solemnity. Panille remembered that day well, a green spring day full of musty earth smells which had not vanished from his memory in all the ship days since. Over one shoulder he had carried a small cotton bag containing the things his mother had packed for him. He looked down at the shipcloth bag into which he had crammed the things for his groundside trip. Much more durable, larger. The small cotton bag of that long-gone day had been limited to 4 kilos, the posted maximum for ship reception. It had contained mostly clothing his mother had made for him herself. He still had the amber stocking cap. And there were 4 primitive photographs, one of the father he had never seen in the flesh, a father killed in a fishing accident. He was revealed as a red-haired man with dark skin and a smile which survived him to warm his son. One picture was his mother, unsmiling and work-worn, but still with beautiful eyes. One showed his father's parents, two intense faces which stared directly into the recording lens. And one slightly larger picture showed the family place, which was, Kerro reminded himself, a patch of land on a patch of planet lost long ago when its sun went nova. Only the photo survived, wrapped with the others in the amber stocking cap within his shipcloth bag. He had found all of this preserved in a hide locker when the shipman had revived him.
I want my son to live,
His mother had said, handing him over to the shipman.
You have refused to take the two of us as a family, but you had better take him.
No mistaking the threat in her voice. She would do something desperate. There were many desperate people doing violent things in those days. The shipmen had appeared more amused than disturbed, but they had accepted young Kerro and sent him into Hybe.
Kerro was my father's name,
She had explained, rolling the R's.
Oh, Kerro was my father's name, she had explained, rolling the R's. That's the way you say it. He was Portuguese and Samoan, a beautiful man. My mother was ugly and ran away with another man, but my father was always beautiful. A shark ate him.
Panille knew that his own father had been a fisherman. His father had been named Arlo, and his father's people had escaped from Gaul to the Chin Islands of the south, far across a sea which insulated them from distant persecution. How long ago was that? He wondered. He knew that hibernation stopped time for the flesh, but something else went on and on and on. Eternity. That was the poet's candle. The people who were keeping him waiting now did not realize how a poet could adjust the candle's flame. He knew he was being tested, but these shipmen hidden behind their censers did not know the tests he had already surmounted with ship. Panille idled away the weight by recalling such a test. At the time, he had not known it was a test. That awareness came later. He had been 16 and proud of his ability to create emotions with words. In the secret room behind records, Panille had activated the comm console for a study session, to explore his own curiosity. Ship began the conversation, which was unusual. Usually, Ship only responded to his questions. Ship's first words had startled him. As has been the case with other poets, do you think you are God? Panille had reflected on this. All the universe is God. I am of this universe. A reasonable answer. You are the most reasonable poet of my experience. Panille remained silent, poised and watchful. He knew Ship did not always give simple answers, and never simple praise. Ship's response had been, once more, unexpected. Why are you not wearing your silver net? I'm not making poems. Then, back to the original subject. Why is there God? Oh, why is there God? The answer popped into his head the way some lines of poetry occurred to him. Information, not decisions. Cannot God make decisions? God is the source of information, not of decisions. Decisions are human. If God makes decisions, they are human decisions. If Ship could be considered to feel excitement, that was the moment for it. And Kerro sensed this. Wait a minute. I might have gotten who was talking wrong. Okay, yeah, it was why is there God? The answer popped into his head the way some lines of poetry occurred to him. Information, not decisions. Cannot God make decisions?
God is the source of information, not of decisions. Decisions are human. If God makes decisions, they are human decisions. If Ship could be considered to feel excitement, this was the moment for it, and Kerro sensed it. Oh, that was the moment for it, and Kerro sensed this. There had been a pattern to the way Ship supplied information to him, and it was a pattern which only a poet might recognize. He was being trained, sensitized to ask the right questions, even of himself. As he waited at Ship Bay 50, the questions were obvious, but he did not like some of the answers those questions suggested. Why were they keeping him waiting? It signaled a callous attitude toward their fellows. And what use had the colony found for a poet? Communication? Or were Hali's fears to be believed? The hatch in front of him scissored open with a faint swish of servo systems, and a voice called out, "Hurry it up!" Oh. "Hurry it up!" Panille recognized the voice and tried not to show surprise as he stepped through into a reception room and heard the hatch seal behind him. Automatics. And yes, it was the bumbler, Dr. Winslow Ferry. With his recent analysis of Ferry, Panille tried to see the man sympathetically. It was difficult. Painful powers centered on this room, which was functional shipside standard. Two hatches in metal walls, instruments in their racks, no ports. The room was blocked by a low barrier and a large console behind which Ferry sat. A gate on the right led to a hatch in the far wall. It occurred to Panille that Ferry was old for Shipside. He had watery gray eyes full of false boredom, puffy cheeks. His breath gave off a heavy floral perfume. There was slyness in his voice. "Brought your own recorder, I see." He punched a notation into the console, which shielded him from the waist down. Ferry glanced at the shipcloth bag on Panille's shoulder. "What else you bring?" "Personal possessions, clothes, a few keepsakes." Hmm. Ferry made another notation. "Let's see." The distrust in this order shocked Panille. He put the bag on a flat counter beside the console, watched while Ferry pawed through the contents. Panille resented every stranger touch on intimate possessions. It became obvious after a time that Ferry was searching for things which could be used as weapons. The rumors were true, then. The people around Oaks feared for their own flesh. Ferry held up the flexible net of silver rolled into its tie bands. "Was it?" "I use that when I'm writing my poetry. Ship gave it to me." Ferry put it onto the counter with care, went back to examining the rest of the bag's contents. Some items of clothing he passed beneath a lens behind him and studied details in a scanner whose shields prevented anyone else from seeing what he saw. Occasionally he made notations in the console. Panille looked at the silver net. What was Ferry going to do with it? He could not take it. Ferry spoke over his shoulder while examining more of Panille's clothing under the scanner lens. "You think the ship's God?" The ship? The usage surprised Panille. Yes. And he thought back to that one conversation he had had with Ship on the subject. That had been a test, too. Ship was God, and God was Ship. Ship could do things mortal flesh could not, at least while remaining mortal flesh. Normal dimensions of space dissolved before Ship. Time carried no linear restrictions for Ship. "I, too, am God, Dr. Winslow Ferry, but I am not Ship. Or am I? And you, dear doctor, what are you?" No doubting the origin of Ferry's question. Ship's godhead remained an open question with many. There had been a time when Ship was the ship, of course. Everyone knew that from the history which Ship taught. Ship had been a vehicle for mortal intelligence once. The ship had existed in the limited dimensions which any human could sense, and it had known a destination. It also had known a history of madness and violence. Then the ship had encountered the holy void, that reservoir of chaos against which all beings were required to measure themselves. Ship's history was cloudy with migrations and hints at a paradise planet somewhere awaiting humankind. But Ferry was revealed as one of the doubters, one who questioned Ship's version of history. Such doubts thrived because Ship did not censure them. The only time Panille had referred to the doubts, Ship had responded clearly and with a creative style to inspire a poet. What is the purpose of doubts, Panille? To test data. Can you test this historical data with your doubts? That required thought, and Panille answered after a long pause. You are my only source. Have I ever given you false data? I've found no falsehoods. Does that silence these doubts? No. Then what can you do with such doubts? That involved more careful thought and a longer pause before answering. I put them aside until a moment arrives when they may be tested. Does that change your relationship with me? Relationships change constantly. Ah, I cherish the company of poets. Panille was shaken out of this memory by the realization that Ferry had spoken to him several times.
I said, what's this?
Panille looked at the object in Ferry's hand. It was my mother's comb.
The stuff, the material.
Tortoise shell. It came from Earth. There was no mistaking the avaricious glint in Ferry's eyes.
Well, I don't know about this.
It's a keepsake from my mother, one of the few things I have left. If you take it, I'll lodge a formal complaint with Ship. Ferry betrayed definite anger. His eyes squinted. His hand trembled with the comb. But his gaze strayed to the silver net. He knew the stories about this poet. This one talked to the ship in the quiet of the night, and the ship answered. Once more Ferry made a notation within the shielded secrecy of his comm console, then delivered himself of his longest speech.
You're assigned groundside to Wheeler Taolini, and it serves you right. There's a freighter waiting in 50B. Take it. She'll meet you groundside.
Panille stuffed his belongings back into the bag while Ferry watched with growing amusement. Did he take something while I was daydreaming? Panille wondered. He preferred the man's anger to his amusement, but there was no way to take everything out of the bag once more to check it. No way. What had happened? What had happened to the people around Oaks? Panille had never seen such slyness and greed in a shipman. And the smell of that stuff on his breath. Dead flowers. Panille sealed the bag.
Go on, they're waiting, Ferry said. Don't waste our time.
Panille heard the hatch open once more behind him. He could feel Ferry's gaze on him all the way out of the reception room. Wheeler Taolini? He had never heard the name before. Then, serve me right?
Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the wiliness of a snake, that I may sting with its venom. You shall repent of the injuries you inflict.
Frankenstein's monster speaks. Ship records. Oakes sat in shadows watching the holographic replay. He was nervous and irritated. Where was Lewis?
Behind him and slightly to his left stood Legata Hamel. The dim glow of the projector underlighted their features. Both of them stared intently at the action in the holofocus. The scene holding their attention revealed the main finger passage behind Ship Bay 19 and leading out to one of the tree domes. Kerro Panille, accompanied by Hali Ekel, walked toward the pickup which had caught the scene. The tree dome could be glimpsed in the background, framed by the end of the passage. Ekel carried her pry box over one shoulder, its harness held loosely by her right hand. Panille wore a recorder at his hip and a small bag from which protruded notepad and stylus. He was dressed in a white one-piece which set off his long hair and beard. The hair was bound in a golden ring, plaited and with the tip draped down his chest on the left. Issue boots covered his feet. Oakes studied each detail carefully.
This is the young man of Ferry's report?
The same.
The rich contralto of Legata's voice distracted Oakes, and he was a few blinks replying. During that time, Panille and Ekel walked from the range of one sensor and into the range of another. The holographic point of view shifted.
They seem a little nervous, he said. I wish I knew what they wrote on that pad.
Love notes.
But why write them if...
He's a poet.
And she is not a poet. What's more, he resists her sexual advances. I don't understand that. She appears quite pneumatic, eminently couchable.
Do you want him picked up and the notepad examined?
No, we must move with discretion and subtlety. Damn, where is Lewis?
Still incommunicado.
Damn him!
His assistants now say Lewis is occupied with a special problem.
Oakes nodded.
Special problem.
That was their private code for something which could not be discussed in the clear. No telling who might eavesdrop. Were the neck pellets, then, no longer immune to spying? Panille and Ekel had stopped near the hatch to Ferry's office in medical. Oakes tried to remember all the times he had seen this young man shipside. Panille had not invited much interest until it had become clear that he really might be talking to the ship. Then that order from the ship for Panille to be sent groundside. Why does the ship want him groundside? A poet! What use could there be for a poet? Oakes decided that he really did not believe Panille talked to the ship. But the ship, and possibly that Rajah Thomas, wanted Panille groundside. Why? He turned the question over and found no shadow.
You're sure the request for Panille came from the ship?
He asked. It's been 6 diurns since the request, and it didn't read like a request to me. It read like an order.
But from the ship, you're certain?
As certain as you can be of anything. As certain as you can be of anything. The irritation in her voice bordered on insubordination. I used your code and made the complete cross-check. Everything scans. Oakes sighed.
Why Panille?
Perhaps more attention should have been paid to the poet. He was one of the originals from Earthside. Have to dig deeper into his past. That was obvious. The scene in the holofocus showed Panille and Ekel parting. Panille turned, and they had a view of his back. A wide and muscular back, Legata noted. She called this to Oakes's attention.
Do you find him attractive, Legata?
I merely point out that he's not some dainty flower sniffer.
Oakes was intensely conscious of the musky odor coming from Legata. She had a magnificently proportioned body, which she had kept from him so far. But Oakes knew himself to be a patient man, patient and persistent. Panille was entering the hatch to Ferry's office. Oakes slapped the switch to stop the replay, leaving the carrier light still glowing. He did not care to have another run through that scene with Ferry. Stupid, bumbling old fool. Oakes glanced at Legata with only the barest turning of his head. Magnificent. She often presented a vapid mask, but Oakes saw the consistent brilliance in her work. Few people knew that she was shockingly strong, a mutation. She concealed an extraordinary musculature under that smooth, warm skin. He found this idea quite exciting. She was known shipwide as a history fanatic who frequently begged records for style displays to copy in her clothing. Currently, she wore a short toga which exposed most of her right breast. The light fabric hung precariously from her nipple. Oakes felt the pulse of her strength, even there.
Taunting me? Tell me why the ship wants a poet groundside.
He said. We'll have to wait and see.
We can guess.
It may be a very simple and open thing. Communication with the.
Nothing the ship does is open and simple. And do not use that high-sounding term with me. It's kelp, nothing but kelp. And it's a damned nuisance.
She cleared her throat, the first sign of nervousness that Oakes had detected in her. He found this pleasing. Yes, she would be ready for the scream room soon. There's still Thomas, she said. Perhaps he can.
You are not to question him about Panille.
She was startled. You're satisfied with the answers he gave you?
I'm satisfied that he's too much for you to handle.
I think you're overly suspicious, she said.
With this ship you cannot be too suspicious. You suspect everything and know you'll miss something.
But they're just too.
The ship ordered this.
There was a long pause while Oakes continued to stare up at her.
Your term. Order. Is that not so?
As far as we can determine.
Do you have any indication, even a faint hint, that Thomas and not the ship initiated this?
There's only one order from ship adding this Panille to the colony roster.
You hesitated over his name.
It slipped my mind. Now she was nervous and angry. Oakes found himself enjoying that very much. This Legata Hamel had potential. She would have to be broken of that habit, however, saying ship rather than the ship.
You don't find the poet attractive?
Not particularly. The fingers of her left hand twisted a corner of her toga.
And there's no record of communication between Thomas and the ship?
Nothing.
You don't find that odd?
What do you mean?
Thomas had to come from Hybe. Who ordered it? Who briefed him?
There's no record of any such communication.
How could there be no record of something we know took place?
Now fear edged her answer. I don't know.
Haven't I warned you to suspect everything?
Yes, you tell me to suspect everyone.
Good. Very good.
He turned back to face the light of the empty holofocus.
Now go and look some more. Perhaps there's something you've missed.
Do you know of something I've missed?
That's for you to find out, my dear.
He listened to the whisk of her clothing as she hurried from the room. There was a brief flare of light from the outer passage as she opened the hatch, then shadows once more, and she was gone. Oakes switched from replay to real time and coded in the passage pickups to follow her progress as she took the turn to records. He switched from pickup to pickup, watching until she sat down at a scan desk in the command level of records and called for the information she wanted. Oakes checked the readouts. She was asking for any messages between the ship and Pandora, all references to Raja Thomas and Kerro Panille. She did not overlook Hali Ekel.
Good.
Her next step would be to use some of Lewis's people for actual surveillance. Oakes knew she already had scanned the records data once, but now she would look even harder, seeking codes or other subterfuge. At least he hoped that was her intent. If the secret were there, she could find it. She simply needed to be challenged, driven, goaded into it.
Suspect everything and everyone.
He shut down the hollow and scowled at the darkness. Soon, very soon, he would have to go groundside for good. No returning to the dangerous confines of the ship. Pandora was dangerous enough, but the need for his own hole, a nest where he could not be watched by the ship, increased with terrifying speed.
This mechanical monster.
He knew it followed every move he made shipside.
It's what I would do.
There is no but. There were some who thought the ship's influence extended farther. But the redoubt would solve all of that. Provided Lewis had not failed him. No, no chance of that. This long silence from Lewis had to be some internal problem with the clones. There were too many failsafe signals for real disasters. None of the signals had been activated. Something else was happening down at the redoubt.
Perhaps Lewis is preparing a pleasant surprise for me, just like him.
Oakes smiled to himself, nursing the privacy of his innermost thoughts. You do not know what I plan, mechanical monster. I have plans for you. He had plans for Pandora, too. Big plans. And the ship was no part of them. Other plans for Legata. She would have to go to the scream room soon. Yes, she had to be made more trustworthy. Nostalgia represents an interesting illusion. Through nostalgia, humans wish for things that never were. The positive memory is the one that sticks. Over several generations, the positive memory tends to weed out more and more of what really existed, refining down to a distillation of haunted desires. Ship quotes. For the first time, Weyla considered refusing an assignment. Not out of fear. She had survived in the research subs where no one else had, and still she accepted the fact that this project must continue at all costs. Beyond instinct, she knew that the electrokelp was the most important factor in colony life. Survival. I've been down there and I survived. I should lead the new team. This thought dominated her awareness as she and Thomas approached the bustle of early dayside activity around the new sub she was having rushed to completion. Thomas worried her. One blink he seemed like a nice enough fellow. The next, what? His mind appeared to wander. He hasn't been out of hide long enough to handle himself here. They stopped a few meters from the work perimeter, and she stared at what was taking shape under the brilliant lights. All this energy, all those workers. They were like insects intent on a giant egg. She tried to fathom the sense of this thing. It did make a certain sense, but a transparent core of plas? They had always used plasma glass in the subs, but this detachable core constructed entirely of plas was a new concept. She could see that it was going to be crowded in there, and didn't know if she would like that. Why Thomas? Why did they put him in charge? She recalled their walk across the compound and into the LTA hangar. He had been too busy giving orders to her for him to see the telltale shadow flicker of a hooded dasher breaking past the sentries. She had cooked it in mid-leap with a hip shot from her lasgun, and immediately began to shiver when she realized that she had almost left the weapon in her cubby. This perimeter was supposed to be secure, the sentries the best. Thomas had barely noticed. Quick, little devils, he said calmly. By the way, there is a poet coming onto our team from Ship. A poet? But we need... We will get a poet because Ship is sending us a poet. But we asked for... I know what we asked for. He sounded like a man suppressing his own misgivings. She said, Well, we still need a systems engineer for... I want you to seduce the poet. Oh, I want you to seduce this poet. She had trouble believing what she had heard. Thomas said, "Your skin's a regular rainbow when you get upset. Just consider this a team assignment. I've seen a hollow of the poet. He's not unattractive in—" "My body is my own," she glared at him, "and nobody, not you, not Oakes, not Ship, tells me who I will or will not let into my body." They were stopped in the compound by then, and she was surprised to see his hands up and a grin on his face. She realized that she had instinctively raised her lasgun to focus between his eyes. Without reducing her furious glare, she lowered the gun and holstered it. "Sorry," he said, and they resumed their walk toward the hangar. Presently he asked, "How important is the kelp team to you?" "He should know that." Everyone knew, and since Thomas had been groundside, he had shown amazing ability to seek out critical information. "It's everything to me." Words began to pour from him. He wanted to know if Panille was a free agent. Was Panille really sent by Ship? Could Panille be working for Oakes or this Lewis people mentioned in such fearful tones? Who? Who? Doubts. A cascade of doubts. Remember Thomas. Doubting Thomas. This is his role. But why the hell should she have to seduce Panille to find out? There was no satisfaction in the answer Thomas gave. "You have to get through all of Panille's barriers, all of his masks." Damn. "Just how important is this project to you?" Thomas demanded. "It's vital, not just to me, but to the entire colony." "Of course it is. That's why you must seduce this poet. If he's to be a working member of this very bizarre team, there are things we must know about him. And a hold we must have on him. There's no other way. Pull his records if you want to know whether he prefers women. I will not—" "That's not my question, and you know it. You will not refuse my orders and remain on this team." "I can't even question the wisdom of your decisions." "Ship sent me. There is no higher authority. And there are things I must know for this project to succeed." She could not deny the intensity of his emotions, but— "Wheeler, you're right that the project's vital. We can't play with time as we play here with words." "And I have nothing to say about the team." She was close to tears and did not care that it showed. "You have a— After all I've been through, I watched them all die. All of them. That buys me some say in how this team goes, or it buys me the R&R I can collect shipside. You name it." Thomas, aware of the deepening flush in her skin, felt the intensity of her presence. Such a quick and perceptive person. He felt himself giving over to feelings he had not experienced in eons. "It's been Ship's centuries." He spoke softly. "We consult, we share data, but all key decisions are mine and final. If that had been the case all along, this project would not have been botched." Weyla keyed the hangar door, and they stepped inside to the brilliant focus of lights and activity, the noise and smell of torches. She put a hand on his arm to stop him. How thin and wiry he felt. "How will seducing the poet make our mission succeed?" "I've told you. Get to the heart of him." Heart of him. She stared across at the activity around the new sub. "And replacing the plasteel with plas." "No single thing will make it for us. We're a team." He glanced down at her. "And we're going in by air." "By—" Then she saw the stranded cables reaching up and out of the brilliant illumination into the upper shadows of the hangar. A gigantic LTA partly inflated there. The sub was being fitted to a lighter-than-air in place of the usual armored gondola. "But why?" "Because the kelp has been strangling our subs." She thought back to her own survival from a doomed sub, the writhing kelp near the shore, the bubble escape, her frantic swim to the rocks, and the near miraculous dive of the observation LTA, which had plucked her away from predators. As though he read her thoughts, Thomas said, "You've seen it yourself. At our first briefing, you said you believed the kelp to be sentient." "It is." "Those subs did not just get tangled. They were snatched." She considered this. On every lost mission where they had the data they knew that Whoa. On every lost mission where they had the data they knew that the sub had been destroyed shortly after. Oh, okay. On every lost mission where they had the data, they knew that the sub had been destroyed shortly after collecting samples. Could the kelp think we were attacking? Her own reasoning made this possible. If the kelp is sentient, yes, it would have an external sensory matrix to respond to pain. Not blind writhing, but sentient response. Thomas spoke in a flat voice. The kelp is not an insensitive vegetable. I've said all along that we should be attempting to communicate with it. And so we shall. Then what difference does it make whether we drop in or dive in from the shoreside? We're still there. We go by lagoon. Thomas moved closer to the work, bending to inspect a line of welds along the Plaz. Good work, he muttered. The welds were almost invisible. When the conversion was complete, the occupants would have close to 360 degrees of visibility. Lagoons? Wheeler asked as he stepped back. Yes. Isn't that what you call those vertical tunnels of open water? Certainly, but we will be surrounded by the kelp, actually helpless if it wants to attack, but we will not touch it. This sub is being fitted to play back the kelp lights, to record the patterns and play them back. Again, he was making sense. Thomas continued to speak as he watched the work. We can approach a perimeter of kelp without making physical contact. As you've seen, when we go in from shore, that's impossible. Not sufficient room between the kelp strands. She nodded her head slowly. There were many unanswered questions about this plan, but she could see the pattern of it. Subs are too unwieldy, he said, but they're all we've got. We must find a sufficiently large pocket of open water, drop into it, and anchor. Then we dive and study the kelp. It sounded perilous, but possible. And that idea of playing back the kelp lights to the kelp. She had seen those coherent patterns herself, sometimes repetitive. Was that the way the kelp communicated? Maybe Thomas really was chosen by Ship. She heard him mutter something. Thomas was the only man she knew who talked to himself more or less constantly. He faded in and out of conversations. You could never be sure whether he had been thinking aloud or talking to you. What? The Plaz. Not as strong as Plasteel. Plasteel. We had to do some buttressing inside. Makes things much more crowded than you might expect. He moved through a group of workers to speak to their foreman, a low-voiced conversation which came through to her only in bits. Then if you lattice the... And I'll want... Where we... Presently he returned to her side. My design isn't as good as it might be, but it'll suffice. So he has his little mistakes, but he doesn't hide them. She had heard a few snatches of talk among the workers. They stood a bit in awe of Thomas. The man showed a surprising ability at their work. The man showed a surprising ability at their work, no matter what the work. Plaz welding, control design. He was a jack of all trades. Master of none. She sensed that this was a difficult man to influence. A fearsome enemy, that one friend who does not mirror but mocks when mockery is needed. This recognition increased her uneasiness. She knew she could like this man, but she felt bad vibrations about the team, and it wasn't even a team yet. And the sub will be crowded even with the three of us. She closed her eyes. Should I tell him? She had never told anyone, not in the debriefings, nor in friendly conversation. The kelp had a special hold over her. It was a thing that began happening as soon as the sub started slipping through the gigantic stems and tentacles. A sexual excitement very nearly impossible to control at times. Absurdity, in fact. She had managed a form of balance by hyperventilating, but it remained troublesome and sometimes reduced her efficiency. When that happened, though, the shock of it cleared the effect. Her old teammates had thought the hyperventilating a response to fear, a way of overcoming the terrors all of them felt and suppressed. And now they were all dead, nobody left to hear her confession. The closeness, the strange sexual air that had taken over the background of the project, the unknowns in Thomas, all frustrated her. She had thought of taking Anti-S to relieve the sexual tensions, but Anti-S made her drowsy and slowed her reflexes. Deadly. Thomas stood beside her, silently observing the work. She could almost see him making mental notes for changes. There were gears turning in his head. "Why me?" she muttered. "What?" He turned toward her. "Why me? Why do I have to take on this poet?" "I've told you what—" "There are women paid to do just what you—" "I won't pay for this. It's a project thing, vital. Your own word. You will do it." She turned her back on him. Thomas sighed. This Wela Taulini was an extraordinary person. He hated what he had asked her to do, but she was the only one he could trust. The project was that vital to her, too. Panille posed too many unanswered questions. Ship's words were plain and simple. There will be a poet. Not, I have named a poet, or I have assigned a poet. There will be. Who was Panille working for? Doubts, doubts, doubts. I have to know. By the old rush in his veins, he already knew that Wela would follow his orders, and he would sink into a sadness the likes of which he had almost forgotten. And he would sink into a sadness the likes of which he had almost forgotten. Old fool, he muttered to himself. What? She turned back toward him, and he could see the acceptance and the resolve on her face. Nothing. She stood facing Thomas a moment, then, It all depends on how much I like the poet. With that, she turned on her heel and left the hangar with characteristic Pandoran speed. At least he has the common decency to feel bad about it? It's pretty messed up. It's I mean, his as a chaplain psychiatrist, like his job is to manipulate people, or at least keep an eye on them and keep them on the straight and narrow, so to speak. But it's like it feels bad, but at least he feels bad about it. It doesn't really make what he's asked her to do any better. One wonders what Panille will feel about this. Religion begins where men seek to influence a god. The biblical scapegoat and Christian redeemer are cast from the same ancient mold, the human subservient to an unpredictable universe, or unpredictable king, and seeking to rid himself of the guilt which brings down the wrath of the all-powerful. Raja Flattery. The Book of Ship. Again, the communications pellet in Oakes's neck made no contact with Lewis. Static or silence, wild images projected on... Excuse me. Static or silence, wild images projected onto his Sorry about that. Taking a breath at the wrong time will sometimes cause my diaphragm to say, No, what have you done? Be banished to the hiccup realm. Static or silence, wild images projected onto his waking dreams. These were all he got. He wanted to reach into his neck and rip the thing out. Why had Lewis ordered no physical contact with the redoubt? Oakes chafed at his own inability to raise too much disturbance. The real purposes of the redoubt remained a secret from most shipmen. To most, it was just a rumored exploratory attempt out on Black Dragon. He did not dare countermand the order which had isolated the redoubt. Too many would see the size of the place. Lewis can't... Oh, sorry.
Lewis can't do this to me.
Oakes paced his cubby, wishing it were even larger. He wanted to walk off his frustrations, but it was full dayside out in the ship's passages, and he knew he would be plagued by the need to make decisions once he stepped from his sanctum. Rumors were raging through the ship. Many had noted his upset. This could not go on much longer.
I would go down myself, except... No, without Lewis to prepare the way, it is too dangerous.
Oakes shook his head. He was too valuable to risk down there yet.
Damn it, Lewis, you could send me some message.
Oakes had come increasingly to suspect that Lewis really was involved in a primary emergency. That, or treachery. No, it had to be an emergency. Lewis was not a leader. Then it had to be a major threat from the planet itself.
Pandora.
In many ways, Pandora was a more immediate and dangerous adversary than the ship. Oakes glanced at the blank holofocus beside his couch. A touch of the buttons would call up real-time images of the planet. To what avail? He had tried a sensor search of the Black Dragon coastline from space. Too many clouds. Not enough detail. He could identify the coastal bay where the redoubt was being built, could even see glinting reflections during the diurn passages of Alki or Rega. Oakes took a deep breath to calm himself. This planet was not going to beat him.
You're mine, Pandora.
As he had told Legata, anything was possible down there. They could fulfill any fantasy. Oakes examined his hands, rubbed them across his bulging stomach. He was determined that he would never under any circumstances grub out a living on the surface of a planet, especially on a planet he owned. This was only natural.
The ship conditioned me to be what I am.
More than any other person he had ever known, Oakes felt that he knew the nature of the ship's conditioning processes, the differences from what they had been when they had lived free to scatter on Earth's surface.
It's the crush of people. Too many people close together. Too many people too close together.
Shipside congestion had been transported groundside. This way of life demanded special adaptations. All shipmen adjusted the same way at bottom. They drugged themselves, gambled, risked everything, even their own lives. Running the colony perimeter naked except for thonged feet. And for what? A bet! A dare! To hide from themselves. In his long walks through the ship, Oakes knew how he screened out the comings and goings of others. Like most shipmen, he could retreat into the deepest interior of his mind for privacy, for entertainment, for living. In these times of food shortage, this faculty had been especially valuable to him. Oakes knew himself to be the heaviest man shipside. He knew there was an envy and angry questioning, but even so, no one stared directly at him with such thoughts openly readable.
Yes, I know these people. They need me.
Under Edmund Kingston's tutelage, he had studied well for the psychiatric side of his specialty, all the banks of records handed down for generations, eons maybe. The way the ship had put them in and out of Hybe, the passage of real time had been lost. Oh, the way the ship had put them in and out of Hybe, the passage of real time had been lost. That unknown length of time bothered Oakes, and the translations from the records produced too many anomalies. Popular apology for the ship said the confusion arose from ship's attempt to rescue as many people as possible. Oakes did not believe this. The translations hinted at too many other explanations.
Translation?
The ship controlled even that. You asked a computer to render the unintelligible intelligible. But linguists pointed out that among the languages found in records were some which existed in a free-floating universe of their own, without discernible beginnings nor descendants. You run into much the same problem when you try to have a generative AI check check whether something is generated by generative AI. It doesn't do a very good job at all, actually. It does a strikingly bad job. What happened to the folk of those rich linguistic heritages?
I don't even know what happened to us.
His childhood memories told him things, though. Compared to the people of the earth from which the ship had plucked them, shipmen were freaks. All of them, clone and natural natal alike. Freaks. The shipside mind had become a place to live very quickly for those who had little space, a few private possessions to call their own, for people torn between warship and dismay. Shipmen cultivated the skills of personalizing whatever the ship provided them. Functional simplicity did not bear the onus or sense of restriction that arbitrary simplicity carried. Each tool, each bowl and spoon and pair of chopsticks, each cubby bore the signature of the user in some small fashion.
My cubby is merely a larger manifestation of this.
The mind, too, was the outpost of privacy, a last place to sit and whittle something sensible out of an insane universe. Only the CP was above it all. Even while he participated, he was above. Oakes felt that sometimes the people around him wore signs revealing their innermost thoughts.
And what about this Raja Thomas? Another CP, and he studied me carefully, much the way I sometimes study others.
It occurred to Oakes then that he had grown careless. Since old Kingston's death, he had thought himself immune to the probing study of others, alone in the ability to snare a shipman's psyche. It was dangerous for someone else to have that weapon. Just one more reason this Thomas would have to be eliminated. Oakes realized he had been pacing back and forth in his cubby. To the mandala, turn and back to the com console, once more to the mandala. He was confronted by the com console when this realization struck him. His hand went out to the keys and he brought into the holofocus a scene from Agrarium D9 out on Ship Rim. He stared at the bustle of workers, at the filtered blue-violet light which set these peoples apart in a world of their own. Yes, if independence from the ship were possible, it would begin with food and the cultivation of life. The axolotl tanks, the clone labs, the biocomputer itself, all were but sophisticated toys for the well-fed, the sheltered, and clothed.
Feed men, then ask of them virtue.
That was an old voice from one of his training records. A wise voice, a practical one. The voice of a survivor. Oakes continued to stare at the workers. They attended their plants with total attention, occupation and preoccupation linked in a particular reverence which he had sensed only among older shipmen during warship. These agrarium workers engaged in a kind of warship.
Warship.
Oakes chuckled, amused by the thought of warship reduced to tending plants in an agrarium. What a grand sight they must be in the eyes of a god! A pack of sniveling beggars. What kind of a god kept its charges in poverty to hear them beg? Oakes could understand a touch of subjugation, but this? This spoke to something else.
Someone had to be boss, and the rest have to be reminded of that occasionally. Otherwise, how can anything be organized to work?
No, he heard the message. It said that the ship's programs were running out. All of the problems were being dumped on the CP's shoulders.
Look at those workers.
He knew they did not have the time to make the ordering decisions for their own lives. When? After work? When the body was tired and the mind was dulled into a personal reverie which precluded insightful judgments for the good of all.
The good of all. That's my job.
He freed them from the agony of the decisions which they were not well informed enough, not energetic enough, nor even intelligent enough to make. It was the CP who gave them that more pleasant gift of drifting time, the time to seek their own ease and recreations.
Recreation. Recreation.
The association flitted through his mind. Recreation was where they were made new again, where all they worked for was made real, where they lived. Looking down at the agrarium workers in the holofocus, Oakes felt like the conductor of an intricate musical score. He reminded himself to remember that analogy for the next general meeting.
Conductor of a symphony.
He liked that. It was food for thought. Did the ship have such thoughts? He experienced a sudden feeling of affinity for the ship, his enemy.
What food are we that we deserve reverence and care? What manna could the ship...
His reverie was shattered by the abrupt opening hiss of his cubby hatch.
Who dared...
The hatch slammed back against the bulkhead, and Lewis darted through, sealed the opening behind him, and dogged it. He was breathing hard, and, instead of his usual self-effacing brown fatigues, he wore a crisp new issue single suit of dark green.
Lewis!
Oakes was overjoyed to see the man, and then dismayed. When Lewis turned at the sealed hatch, it was apparent that his face bore signs of quick medical patchwork to cover numerous cuts and bruises. And he was limping. Judgment prepares you to enter the stream of chance and use your will. You use judgment to modulate will. Thinking is the performance of the moment. You sit in judgment, a convection center for the currents where past prepares a future. It is a balancing act. Kerro Panille, the Avata argue. Hali Ekel, moving with her usual sure-footed grace, leaped up one-handed to grasp the lift bar for the ceiling hatch leading to the software storage section of records. Her prybox, suspended on its shoulder harness, slapped her hip as she jumped. She had discovered less than an hour earlier that Kerro Panille was headed groundside. He had done this without farewell, not even a note. Or a poem. Not that I have any special hold on him. She opened the hatch and levered herself up into the service tube. He refuses the breeding match with me. She pushed such thoughts aside. But his leaving this way hurt. They had come to maturity in the same creche section, were the same age, within days, and had remained friends. She had heard his stories of Earthside, and he had heard her stories. Hali had no illusions about her own emotions. She thought Kerro the most attractive male shipside. Why was he always so distant? She crouched to scuttle up the curving oval of the tube. It was only 160 centimeters in its longest diameter, 8 centimeters short of her height, but she was used to moving around ship through such little-known shortcuts. It's not as though I were ugly. Her shipcloth single-suit, she knew, revealed an attractive feminine figure. Her skin was dark, eyes brown, and she wore her black hair cropped short, as all technicians did. All of the medtechs were acutely aware of the sanitary advantages of hair shorn to a bristly cap. Not that she had ever wanted Kerro to clip his hair or beard. She found his style exciting. But he did not have to deal with medical problems. She found the records access hatch locked, but she had memorized the code, and it took only seconds to work the hatch. Ship buzzed at her from the interior sensor eye as she stooped and slipped through into the storage area. Hali, what are you doing? She stopped in shock. Vocal? Everyone knew the flat, metallic work voice of Ship, the means of necessary contacts, but this was something different. A resonant voice, full of emotional overtones. And Ship had used her name. I want a software reader station. There's always one open in here. You are very unconventional, Hali. Have I done something wrong? Her strong fingers worked to seal the dog Her strong fingers worked to seal the hatch dogs as she spoke, and she hesitated there, fearful that she had offended Ship. But Ship was talking to her. Really talking. Some would think your actions wrong. I was just in a hurry. No one will tell me why Kerro has gone groundside. Why did you not think to ask me? I was. She glanced along the narrow passage between the rotary bins of software disks toward the reader's station. Its keyboard and screen were blank, unoccupied as she had expected. Ship would not leave it there. I am never farther from you than the nearest monitor or console. She peered up at the orange bulb of the sensor eye. It was a baleful orb, a cyclopean pupil with its surrounding metal grid through which Ship's voice issued. Was Ship angry with her? The measured control of that awful voice filled her with awe. I am not angry with you. I merely suggest that you show more confidence in me. I am concerned about you. I am confident of you, Ship. I worship. You know that. I just never thought you would talk to me like this. As I talk to Kerro Panille? You are jealous, Hali. She was too honest to deny it, but the words would not come. She shook her head. Hali, go to the keyboard at the end of this aisle. Depress the red cursor in the upper right-hand corner, and I will open a door behind that station. A door? You will find a hidden room there with another instruction station, which Kerro Panille often used. You may use it now. Wondering and fearful, she obeyed. The entire keyboard and its desk swung wide to reveal a low opening. She crouched to enter and found herself in a small room with a vaguely yellow couch. Muted green light came from concealed illuminators at the corners of the room. There was a large console with screen and keyboard, a familiar holofocus circle on the floor. She knew the setting, a small teaching lab, but one she had not even known existed. It was smaller than any other. It was smaller than any other of her experience. She heard the hatch seal its the she heard the hatch seal itself behind her, but she felt unaccountably secure in this privacy. Kerro had used this place. Ship was concerned about her. There was the unmistakable musk of Kerro's flesh on her sensitive nostrils. She rubbed at the gold ring in her nose. There was a stationary swivel seat at the keyboard. She slipped into it. No, Hali. Stretch out on a couch. Stretch out on the couch. You will not need the keyboard there. You will not need the keyboard here. Ship's voice came from all around her. She looked for the source of that awesomely measured voice. There were no sensors visible, or monitor eyes. Do not fear, Hali. This room is within my protective shield. Go to the couch. Hesitantly, she obeyed. The couch was covered with a slick material which felt cold against her neck and hands. Why did you come here looking for an unoccupied terminal, Hali? I wanted to do something definite. You love Kerro? You know I do. It is your right to try to make him love you, Hali, but not by subterfuge. I I want him. So you sought my help? I'll take any help that I can get. You have free access to information, Hali, but what you do with it is your own decision. You are making a life. Do you understand that? Making a life? She could feel her own perspiration against the slick material of the couch. Your own life. It is your own. A gift. You should treat it well. Be happy with it. Would you match Kerro and me again? Only if that really suits you both. I'd be happier with Kerro, and Kerro's gone groundside. It came out almost a wail, and she felt tears at the edges of her eyes. Can you not go, groundside?
You know I have shipside medical responsibilities.
Yes, the shipman must be kept healthy that colony may eat. But I ask about your own decision.
They need me here.
Hali, I ask that you trust me.
She blinked at the empty screen across from the couch. What a strange statement. How could one not trust Ship? All people were creatures of Ship. The invocations of worship marked their lives forever. But she felt that some personal response was being demanded, and she gave it. Of course I trust you.
I find that gratifying, Hali. Because of that, I have something just for you. You are to learn about a man called Yashua. The name is in an ancient language which is known as Aramaic. Yashua is a form of the name Joshua, and it is where Jesus Lewis gets his name. Oh, and it is where Jesus Lewis gets his name.
In all of this, Hali was most startled by Ship's pronunciation of Jesus. Anyone shipside referring to Jesus called him Jesus. But Ship's diction could not be questioned. Jesus. So this, for the record, is page 125 of the book. The first time we have reference to Jesus Lewis is page 7. So it's just shy 120 pages before you know how to pronounce his name. I've been doing it the way it's pronounced, the way I've done it, because I've read the book before. That's why. She stared at the, oh, I'll just repeat that last bit. In all of this, Hali was most startled by Ship's pronunciation of Jesus. Anyone shipside referring to Jesus called him Jesus. But Ship's diction could not be questioned. Jesus. Jesus is spelled Hesoos, and Jesus, the pronunciation, is Geezus. Anyway, she stared at the screen. The lab lights suddenly flared to bright, glinting off the metal surfaces. She blinked and sneezed. Maybe it isn't Ship talking to me, she thought. What if it's someone playing a joke? This was a frightening thought. Who would dare such a prank?
I am here, Hali Ekel. It is Ship speaking to you.
Do you read my mind?
Reserve that question, Hali, but know that I can read your reactions. Do you not read the reactions of those around you?
Yes, but
Do not fear. I mean you no harm.
she tried to swallow, recalling what Ship had said she could learn. Yeshua? Who is this Yeshua?
To learn that, you must travel.
Travel? What? She cleared her throat and forced herself to be calm. Kerro had used this lab often and had never shown fear of Ship. Where will I travel?
Not where, but when. You will stroll into that which humans call time.
She took this to mean that Ship would show her a holo record. A projection? What are you going to...
Not that kind of projection. For this experience, you are the projection.
Me? The...
It is important that shipmen learn about Yeshua, who is also called Jesus. I have chosen you for this journey.
She felt tightness in her chest, panic near. How?
I know how, Ekel. I know how, Hali Ekel, and so do you. Answer me. How do your neurons function? Any medtech knew that. She tossed it off without thinking. A charged measure of acetylcholine across the synapses where... A charged measure, yes. A bridge. A shortcut. You take shortcuts all the time. But I am the universe, Hali Ekel. Every part of me, each part in its entirety, the universe. All mine, including the shortcuts. But my body, what? She broke off, stopped by an intense fear for this precious flesh she wore. I will be with you, Hali Ekel. That matrix which is you, that also is part of the universe and mine. You wish to know if I read your thoughts? She found the very idea deeply disturbing, an invasion of her privacy. Do you? Echo. Such sadness Ship put into her name. Our powers are of the same universe. Your thought is my thought. How can I help but know what you think? She struggled for a deep breath. Ship's words spoke of things just beyond her grasp, but Warship had taught her to accept. Very well. Now, are you ready to travel? She tried to swallow in a dry throat. Her mind searched for some logical objection to this thing which Ship proposed. A projection? The words represented such an insubstantial thing. Ship said she would be the projection. How threatening that sounded. Why, why must I go through time? Through? Ship's tone conveyed an exquisite reprimand. You persist in thinking of time as linear and a barrier. That is not even close to the reality, but I will play that game if it reassures you. What is... I mean, if it's not linear... Think of it as linear if you wish. Think of it as thousands of meters of computer tape unraveled and crammed into this little lab. You could move from one time to another, a shortcut, just by reaching across the loops and folds. But, I mean, if you actually go across, how can you get back to... You never let go of the now. In spite of that deep and grinding fear, she was interested. Two places at one time? All time is one place, Echo. It occurred to her then that Ship had shifted from the personal and reassuring Hali to Ekel, subtly but definitely. Why are you calling me Ekel now? Because I perceive that this is the line which you believe to be yourself. I do it to help you. But if you take me somewhere else? I have sealed this room, Echo. You will have two bodies simultaneously, but separated by a very long time and a very great distance. Will I know both? You will be conscious of only one flesh, but you will know both. Very well. What do I do? Stay there on the lab conch. Stay there on the lab conch. Sorry, excuse me. My throat's all scrackly. I don't know why. Stay there on the lab couch and accept the fact that I will make another body for you at another time. Will it? If you do what I tell you to do, it will not hurt. You will understand the speech of this other place, and I will give you an old body, an old woman. Old bodies are not as threatening to others. No one bothers an old woman. She tried to relax in obedience. Accept. Accept. But questions filled her mind. Why are you sending me to... Eavesdrop, Echo. Observe and learn, and no matter what you see, do not try to interfere. You would cause unnecessary pain, perhaps even to yourself. I just watch and do not interfere. You will see the consequences presently of interfering with time. Before she could ask another question, she felt a prickling along the back of her neck. A slither of chill swept down her spine. Her heart slammed against her rib cage. Ship's voice came from a long distance. Ready, Echo? It was a command, not a question. But she answered, and her own voice echoed in her skull. Yes. Given that Halloween just happened yesterday, happy Halloween, incidentally, to everyone. I think I think there's a number of places that probably do a showing of Rocky Horror Picture Show, and let's just say Hali Ekel gets to do the time warp again. Let's do the time warp again. The mind. Oh, sorry. The mind is a mirror of the universe. See the reflections? The universe is no mirror for the mind. Nothing out there, nothing in here, shows ourselves. Kerro Panille, The Collected Poems. Wela Taulini lay in her groundside cubby, fatigue in her body, fatigue in her mind, but unable to sleep. Thomas had no mercy. Everything must be done to his perfectionist demands. He was a fanatic. They had spent 21 hours going through the operational routine for the new sub. Thomas would not wait for the arrival of the poet, who was somewhere in the bowels of processing. No, we will use what time we have. She tried to take a deep breath. Pain yanked a knot behind her breastbone. She wondered how Thomas came to them. How could he be from ship? Things he did not know, things that shipmen took for granted, worried her. There was the incident with the hooded dasher. He was calm, though, I'll give him that. What really surprised her was his ignorance of the game. A crowd had gathered behind the LTA hangar, off-shift crew, most of them drinking what shipmen called spinneret wine. What's this about? Thomas pointed his clipboard at the group. It's the game. She looked at him with a new amazement. You mean you don't know the game? What game? That's just a bunch of drunks having a good time. Strange. There was nothing in my briefing about liquors of any kind. There have always been lab alcohols, she said, and at one time there were wines and brandies. But officially we can't afford to give up any productive food for wine. Somehow, some do, and the market is brisk. Those men, she nodded toward the group, have traded away some of their food chits for it. So they trade food for wine that costs food to make, maybe less food. Isn't that their right? His eyes squinted at her. Yes, but food's short. They're going hungry. In this place, going hungry means you slow down. And here, Raja Thomas, if you slow down, you die. And maybe someone else dies because of it. Do you do it? He asked softly. Yes. Her skin glowed red. When I can afford the time. She followed Thomas as he strolled toward the crew, pulled the sleeve of his single suit to stop him short. There's more. What? It requires an even number of players, men or women. Each one buys into the game with a certain number of food chits. They pair off any way they wish, and each one draws a weehee stick from a basket. They compare, and the longest stick wins a round. The shorter stick of the pair is eliminated, so those drawing the longer sticks pair up. They draw again, and so on until there is only one couple. What about the food chits? The players up the ante every round, so if there are a lot of people, the game gets very expensive. The game gets pretty Jesus, my lips aren't working. The players up the ante every round, so if there are a lot of people, the game gets pretty expensive. Does the last couple divide the chits? No, they draw again. The one who draws the longer stick wins the chits. That seems boring enough. Yes. She hesitated. Then, the loser runs the perimeter. The loser runs the perimeter. She said it offhand, without as much of a with. I'm getting really frustrated right now. She hesitated. Then, the loser runs the perimeter. She said it offhand, without as much as a blink. You mean they run around the outside? His thumb hung in the air over his shoulder. She nodded. They run it naked. But they can't possibly. That's almost 10 kilometers out in the open. Some make it.
But why? Not for food. It's not that bad yet, is it?
No, not for food. For favours, jobs, quarters, partners. For the thrill. For the chance to go out with a flash from a boring life. The long sticks are the losers. Food shits are a consolation prize. The winner gets to run the P. Thomas let out a long breath. What are the odds? Oh my God, I can't even remember his voice. What are the odds? By experience, they work out just like the rest of the game. 50-50. Half don't make it.
And it's legal?
It was her turn to look at him quizzically. They have the right to their own bodies. He turned to watch the people playing this game. The crew had paired up, drawn, paired. Oh, the crew had paired up, drawn, and was now down to the last pair. A man and a woman this time. The man had no nose, but wrinkled slits in his forehead pulsed with the moisture that Thomas took for breath. The woman looked vaguely like someone he had known. They drew, and the woman matched longer. The crowd cheered and helped her gather her winnings. They tucked them in her collar and sleeves and belt. The last of the wine was passed around, and the group began moving toward the west quarter exterior hatch.
He's really going out there?
Thomas followed them with his eyes. Did you notice his right eyebrow?
Yes.
He looked up at her.
It looked as though he had 2 eyebrows above it. And the nose.
Those were tattoos, hash marks. You get one for running the P.
Then this is his 3rd?
That's right. His odds are still 50-50. But there is a groundside saying, you go once, you've had your flirt with death. You go twice, you live twice. Go 3 times, and go for me. And go for me.
Charming.
It's a good game.
You ever play it, Taolini?
She swallowed, and the glow faded out of her skin. No.
A friend?
She nodded.
Let's get back to work,
he said, and walked her slowly back to the hangar. Waylo remembered this exchange with the odd feeling that she had missed something in Thomas's responses. Thomas would not even pause for worship. He permitted a grudging rest, hardly a hesitation, only when fatigue had them dropping programs and forgetting coordinates. During one of these rests, he had started an odd conversation with her, and it kept her awake now. What was he trying to say to me? They had been seated in the globe of Plaz which would shield them in the depths of the sea. Workmen continued their activity all around the outside. She and Thomas sat so close to each other that they had been required to learn a special rhythm to keep from bumping elbows. Wayla had missed the right sequence of keys for the dive train 3 times running. Take a rest. There was an accusation in his tone, but she sank back into the sheltered contours of her seat, thankful for any relief. Thankful even for the crash harness which supported her. Muscles did not have to do what the harness did. Presently, Thomas's voice intruded on her consciousness. Once upon a time, there was a 14-year-old girl. She lived on Earth, on a chicken farm. I lived on a chicken farm, Wayla thought. Then, he's talking about me. She opened her eyes. So you've pried into my records? That's my job. A 14-year-old girl on a chicken farm. A 14-year-old girl on a chicken farm. His job. She thought about that girl she had been, child of emigrants, grubbers in the dirt, techno-peasants, Gaulish middle class. I broke away from that. No. To be honest, she had to admit that she had run away. A sun going nova meant little to a 14-year-old girl, a girl whose body had become a woman's much earlier than her contemporaries. I ran away to ship. She had held such conversations with herself many times. Wayla closed her eyes. It was as though two people occupied her consciousness. One of them she called Runaway, and the other Honesty. Runaway had objected to shipman life and had railed against groundside dangers. Runaway asked, "Why was I chosen for this damned tricky life anyway?" Honesty replied, "As I recall it, you volunteered." "Then I must have parked my brains somewhere. What in hell was I thinking?" "What do you know about hell?" Honesty asked. "Yeah, I have to know hell before I can understand paradise. Isn't that what the CP says?" "You have it backwards, as usual." "You know why I volunteered, damn it!" The runaway voice was edged with tears. "Yes, because he died. 10 years with him, and then poof." "He died! That's all you have to say about it. He died!" What else would there be to say? What else would there be to say? Honesty's voice was level, sure.
You're as bad as the CP, always answering with questions. What did Jim do to deserve that?
He tested for limits and found them, when he ran the P.
But why doesn't Ship or the CP ever talk about it?
About death? Honesty paused. What's there to talk about? Jim is dead and you're alive, and that's much more important.
Is it? Sometimes I wonder. I wonder what's going to happen to me.
You live until you die.
But what's going to happen?
Honesty paused again, uncharacteristically, and said, You fight to live.
Wayla, Wayla, wake up!
It was Thomas's voice. She opened her eyes, tipped her head onto the seat back, and looked at him. Light glittered from the plaza above him, and there was the sound of workmen pounding metal out in the hangar. She noted that Thomas, too, looked tired, but was fighting it.
I was telling you a story about Earth, he said.
Why?
It's important to me. That 14-year-old girl had such dreams. Do you still have dreams about your life?
Her skin began a nervous glow. Does he read minds? Dreams? She closed her eyes and sighed. What do I need with dreams? I have my work.
Is that enough?
Enough? She laughed. That's not my worry. Ship is sending down my prince, remember?
Do not blaspheme.
I'm not blaspheming, you are. Why do I have to seduce this poor idiot poet when...
We won't argue that again. Leave now. Quit. But no more arguments.
I'm not a quitter.
So I've noticed.
Why did you pry into my records?
I was trying to recapture that girl. If she won't start with dreams, maybe she'll get somewhere with dreamers. I want to tell her what's become of those dreams.
Well, what's become of them?
She still has them. She always will.
Aw. You speak of gods. Very well. Avata speaks that language now. Avata says consciousness is the species God's gift to the individual. Consciousness is the individual God's gift to the species. In conscience, you f- in conscience, you find the structure, the form of consciousness, the beauty. Kerro Panille. Translations from the Avata. Hali felt no passage of time, but when the echoes of her own voice stopped reverberating in her consciousness, she found she was facing herself. She still sensed the tiny, reaching lab which Ship had revealed behind the terminal in records. And there was her own flesh in that lab. Her body lay stretched out on the yellow couch, and she stared down at it without knowing how she did this. Light filled the lab, splashed from every surface. It startled her how different she appeared from the mirror image she had known all of her life. The slick yellow material of the couch accented her brown skin. She thought of the brilliance of the light. She thought the brilliance of the light should be dazzling, but could feel no discomfort. Where her short black hair stopped below her left ear, there was a dark mole. Her nose ring caught the light and glittered against her skin. An odd aura surrounded her body. She wanted to speak, and for a panic-seized instant wondered how she could do this. It was as though she struggled to get back into her body. Sudden calm washed her, and she heard Ship's voice. "I am here, Ekel." "Is that like hibernation?" She had no sensation of speaking, but heard her own voice. "Far more difficult, Ekel. I show you this because you must remember it." "I'll remember." Abruptly, she felt herself tumbling slowly in darkness, and at the front of her awareness was Ship's promise to give her another body for this experience. An old woman's body. How will that feel? There was no answer except the tunnel. It was a long, warm tunnel, and the most disturbing thing was that it contained no heartbeat, no pulse at all. But there was a glimmer of light at some distance, and she could glimpse a hillside beyond the light. Raised shipside, she understood corridors without thinking about them, but when she emerged through the oval whiteness, it was a shock to find herself in an unconfined area. Now there was a pulse beat, though. It was in her breast. She put a hand there, felt rough fabric, and looked down. The hand was dark, old, and wrinkled. "That's not my hand." She looked around. It was a hillside. She felt the deep vulnerability of her presence here. There was sunlight, a golden glowing which felt good to this body. She looked at her feet, her arms, an old body. And there were other people at a distance. Ship spoke in her mind. "It will take a moment for you to become acquainted with this body. Do not try to rush it." Yes, she could feel her awareness creeping outward through halting linkages. Sandals covered her feet. She felt the straps. Rough ground underfoot when she tried 2 shuffling steps. Fabric swished against her ankles, a coarsely woven sack of a garment. She felt how it abraded her shoulders when she moved. It was the only Yep, nope, I had it right. It was the only garment covering her body. No, there was a piece of cloth wound round her hair. She reached up and touched it, turning as she did this to face downhill. A crowd of several hundred people could be seen down there, perhaps as many as 300. She was not sure. She felt that this body might have been running before she assumed her place in it. Breathing was difficult. A stink of old perspiration assaulted her nostrils. She could hear the crowd now, a murmurous animal noise. They were moving slowly uphill toward her. The people in it surrounded a man who dragged what appeared to be part of a tree over his shoulder. As he drew nearer, she saw blood on his face, an odd circlet at his brow. It looked like a spiny sweatband. The man appeared to have been beaten. Bruises and cuts could be discerned through his shredded gray robe. While the man still was some distance from her, she saw him stumble and fall on his face in the dirt. A woman in a faded blue robe hurried to help him up, but she was beaten back by two young men who wore crested helmets and stiff upper garments which glittered. There were many such men in the crowd. Two of them were kicking and prodding the fallen man, trying to force him to his feet. Armor, she thought, recalling her history hollows. They're wearing armor. A sense of the great time which stretched between this moment and her shipside life threatened to overwhelm her. Ship? Be calm, Ekel. Be calm. She forced several deep, painful breaths into the old lungs. The armored men, she saw, wore dark skirts which covered them to the knees, heavy sandals on their feet, metal greaves over their shins. Each had a short sword sheathed at the shoulder, with the handle sticking up beside his head. They used long staves to control the crowd. No, she corrected herself. They were using spears, clubbing the crowd back with the butt ends. The crowd was milling around now, concealing the fallen figure from her. There was a great screaming and crying from them, a conflict which she did not understand. Some called out, "Let him up! Please let him up!" Others shouted,
Beat the bastard! Beat him!
and there was one shrill voice heard above all the others.
Stone him here! He won't make it to the top!
A line of the armored men pushed the crowd back, leaving a tall, dark man beside the fallen one. The dark man glanced all around, his fear obvious. He jerked to one side, trying to flee, but two of the armored men cut him off, swinging the butts of their spears at him. He dodged back to the side of the fallen man. One of the soldiers shook the pointed tip of his spear at the dark one, shouted something which Hali could not make out. But the dark one stooped and picked up the tree, lifting it off the fallen one. What is happening here? Observe, and do not interfere. A cluster of women was wailing nearby. As the fallen man climbed to his feet and accompanied the dark one, who now dragged the tree, all moved up the hill toward Hali. She watched them carefully, seeking any clue to tell her what was happening. Obviously, it was something painful. Was it momentous? Why had Ship insisted she witness this scene? They drew nearer. The beaten man lurched along and, presently, stopped near the wailing women. Hali saw that he was barely able to stand. One of the women slipped through the ring of soldiers and mopped the injured man's bloody face with a gray cloth. He coughed in long, hard spasms, holding his left side and grimacing with each cough. Hali's medtech training dominated her awareness. The man was badly injured, broken ribs at least, and perhaps a punctured lung. There was blood at the corner of his mouth. She wanted to run to him, use her sophisticated skills to ease his suffering. Do not interfere. Ship's presence was like a palpable thing, a wall between her and the injured man. Steady, Ekel. Ship was in her mind. She gripped her hands into fists, took several deep, gasping breaths. This brought the smell of the crowd into focus. It was the most disgusting sensory experience she had ever known. They were rank with an unwashed festering. How could they survive the things which her nostrils reported? Sounds about right for the time period in question. Reason number, well, it's on the short list of reasons why I won't be doing time travel anytime soon. She heard the injured man speak then. His voice was soft and directed at the women who fell silent when he spoke. Weep not for me, but for your children. Hali heard him clearly. Such tenderness in that voice. One of the armored men struck the injured one in the back with a spear butt. Then, oh, no, there's no extra comma there. One of the armored men struck the injured one in the back with a spear butt then, forcing him to resume that lurching march uphill. They drew nearer. The dark one dragged the section of the tree. What were they doing? The injured one looked back at the cluster of women who once more were wailing. His voice was strong, much stronger than Hali had thought possible. If they do these things in a green tree, what will they do in a dry? Turning back, the injured one looked full at Hali. He still clutched his side, and she saw the characteristic red froth of a lung puncture at his lips. Ship, what are they doing to him? Observe. The injured one said, You have traveled far to see this. Ship intruded on her shock. He is talking to you, Ekel. You can answer him. The dust of the crowd welled up around her, and she choked on it before being able to speak. Then, How how do you know how far I've come? How do you know how far I've come? It was an old woman's cracked voice she heard issuing from her mouth. You are not hidden from me, the injured one said. One of the soldiers laughed at her then and thrust his spear in her direction. He did it almost playfully.
You long old woman, you may have travelled far, but I can send you farther.
His companions guffawed at the jest. Hali recalled Ship's reassurance. No one bothers an old woman. The injured man called out to her, Let them know it was done! Then the angry shouts of the crowd and the swirling, odorous dust engulfed her. She almost choked as they moved past, caught by a coughing spasm which cleared her throat. When she could, she turned to gaze after the crowd, and a gasp was forced from her. At the top of the hill, beyond the crowd, two men were hanging on tree constructions with cross pieces, such as that being dragged along with the injured man. A momentary opening in the crowd gave her another glimpse of the injured one, and, turning back toward her, he shouted, if anyone understands God's will, you must. Once more the milling crowd hid him from her. God's will? A hand touched her arm, and she jerked away in fright, whirling to see a young man in a long robe at her side. His breath smelled of sewage, and his voice was an unctuous whine.
He says you come from afar, mother, the foul-breathed one said. Do you know him?
The look in Foul-breath's eyes made her acutely aware of the vulnerable old flesh which housed her consciousness. This was a dangerous man. Very dangerous. The look in his eyes reminded her of Oak's. He could cause great pain.
You had better answer me,
he said, and there was poison in his voice. And that is where we will call it for today. Optical Antenna says those several thousand years in the future will probably think the same of us in this time. Ah, yes, such optimism. Us in the future. Well, actually, that assumes that we manage to keep our civilization ticking over, and it doesn't implode over the course of the next, call it 50 years within the century, and things aren't looking super great on that front. I have no doubt that the species will survive. We're cockroaches, man. We'd survive a nuclear apocalypse. Some of us. We might not be intact. Civilization will be toast. But as a species, yeah, I think there's a good chance we'd keep kicking. Even if we were to annihilate our entire species with global thermonuclear war or a disease or something, anything short of a colliding, like, galactic event or stellar event is not going to completely eradicate the opportunity for life on the planet. Just, it'll be different life, because the stuff that had been around up until then will be dead. But if you have a big enough rock hit another rock, more reasons. More reasons to be cheerful, I guess. Anyway, provided we are optimistic, We survived the Ice Age. Hell yeah, we did. Bunch of other species didn't, but a lot did. And the Ice Age, relatively speaking, not that bad in terms of extinction level events. There's that one where a series of volcanoes underneath, I guess what we'd call part of Russia now, went off, which puts really any extinction level event up until then pretty much to shame. Oh, what is that one called? I used to know this. It's embarrassing. It was, I think it was the one after the dinosaurs. I'm pretty sure it was post dinosaurs, pre Ice Age. That one was really, really bad. Um, that one was very, like, that killed off a tremendous percentage of the biosphere. Oh no, I'm thinking of the one before the dinosaurs. I take it back. That one killed off like 90 something percent of all the biological life on the planet. It was really bad. Um, extremely, extremely bad. Anyway, the one that wiped out the dinosaurs was also bad, but it's hard to appreciate just how long term the the like it's nice to say, oh, a big rock from space and suddenly dinosaurs dead. It's over a much longer period of time than that. It was a series of dramatic climactic shifts, which and and a big part of it was related to changes in water acidity and pH balance, which meant that stuff like algae, the algae of the time, largely got wiped out. So like bottom rung of the food pyramid gets knocked out, and everything else just kind of tumbled down. Enough stuff survived though that here we are, eventually millions of years down the road. Anyway, I know I've read somewhere if you detonated the entire accumulated nuclear arsenal all at once, it wouldn't amount to all that much at the end of the day. The radioactive fallout would, and that would be very bad. That would kill a lot of things. That would kill many, many, many things, us included. Um, but the actual exploding bombs would not be all that we couldn't crack the planet in half, for instance. We'd like to think that we could, but we really couldn't. The Earth's pretty big. Yellowstone could blow. That would be pretty bad. That would change things. That would probably, if it was bad enough, lead to a premature ice age. Eventually, we'll have an ice age if we because things are cyclical. um, if we keep proceeding with emissions the way we're doing, but things are going to heat up a lot first. Um, although we could do things in such a way that we wind up just cooking ourselves to death instead, and it just goes the Venus route, which would be really bad. Suffice it to say, that's our bit. Hali Ekel has done the time warp, is doing the time warp. It's not over yet. We've had more references to the Scream Room, and it's going to be unpleasant. I will try to make sure that I put a warning on that one because it's pretty squicky. It's not fun. Um, it's some Cronenberg stuff, and then some, and then it got worse. Uh, minor spoilers. Let's see. Yeah, so we are not quite at the halfway point. We're just next week we'll hit the halfway point. It's a fairly long one. Um, it's a reasonably beefy book. It's probably going to be 8 streams roughly. So we finished with Frankenstein. We finished with Frankenstein, but next week there are 2 short stories in the appendices that I'll read. We'll see how long that takes. Monday we'll continue reading Manfac by Martin Caden. One woman's journey to make her man to make her man manly again. She thirsty. Totally understandable though. They loved each other. Love each other, even. Present tense. After we finish Frankenstein, well, the short stories anyway. We're finished the book proper. After we finish that, I'll probably be doing Bear v. Shark by Chris Batchelder. Batchelder? I'm not sure how that's pronounced. It'll give me an interesting opportunity to do some interesting reading chops, because it's not laid out in a traditional format. That one will be fun. After we finish with the Jesus incident, a month and change from now, we'll get started on the next book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu. We'll be reading The Dark Forest, which is pretty good. Mostly. There's a chunk of it where you're going to be like, why are we here? What are we doing? What's the point? It's longer than it needs to be. There is a point, sort of, because it involves a certain degree of character growth, but it's pretty rough. It takes a while. After we get through Manfac, I'm probably going to do going to do Yukikaze by Chohei Kambayashi, because fighter jets are neat, and it's just legitimately good science fiction, and it's a good excuse to do it. Anyway, we shall see how things go. I'm really disjointed right now. I don't know why. I'll see you all later. Thanks for tuning in. If you are listening to this after the fact and are wondering, hey, why is this guy's performance so rough and unedited and stuff? It's because I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at 12 noon U.S. East Coast time. So you can tune in live if you want at 12 noon on those 3 days. You don't have to, though. You can just keep listening to them after the fact. I don't care. It's fine, so long as people enjoy them. And if you're not enjoying them, tell me why. Be constructive with your criticism. Help me out. Help me to help you. Help us all helping. Lee, help. Help! I need somebody. I can't do a very good Liverpool on command. Not just anybody. Anyway. Yeah, that'll do it. I got a scooch. Thanks again to everyone who tuned in. Remember to make sure you're registered to vote, and please do vote. Please, if you're an Amerikanski. I've already got my absentee ballot in because next week's gonna be a whirlwind. Please do. It matters, probably. On the cosmic scheme of things, no, it does not matter. Okay. In the more immediate human scale of things, at least in America, the United States of America, it does rather matter, as will become clear. Anyway, I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm just saying you should. They caught the guy who burned those ballot boxes, didn't they? I forget what the deal was with that. I remember seeing a blurb. I need to read up on that. I'm pretty sure they did. That's not acceptable behavior. We don't do that. We're not supposed to do that here. But them's the breaks. Not everybody's going to follow the rules. And yeah, have a good weekend. See you all Monday.